While much of the world's focus has been on Trump's trade tariff war, on the situation with the Russians and the Ukrainians and where that war is going, if it's going to be a negotiated settlement, what's going to be the terms, a lot of things going on the international stage. One of the things that's kind of dropped off, at least in the West, off the main screens has been the war between Israel and Hamas, and especially the reliance and the situation with the people of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. We want to bring that back into the headline today, or back into our limelight, because a lot of things have been happening, and I think you need to know about it. And to try to help us make sense out of what's actually happened down there, we have back on the show, I'm absolutely delighted to say, Professor Omar Bartov, former IDF soldier and a historian and professor at Brown University. Professor, first of all, welcome back to the show.
I'm very happy to be with you again.
Listen, a lot of things going on. I think since the last time we've had you on there, you've actually been back to Israel to see a lot of these things firsthand. And I wonder if you could just tell us a little bit about what you did and what you observed during that time.
Yeah, so I was there in December. That was before the ceasefire that now is no longer on. I'd say that maybe my most distinct impression was that people knew more, Israelis knew more about what was going on in Gaza, were somewhat less in denial of the devastation of Gaza. At the same time, did not seem to be particularly interested in that. There was a sense of resignation among people that I was speaking with, some sort of despair, because the internal politics in Israel is so messy, and people seem to have less and less hope there would be any change. Now, since then, there was a ceasefire, and there was momentary signs of hope, because at least quite a number of the hostages were returned, including a relative from my own family.
Oh, wow.
Then Israel broke the ceasefire. And now things are, well, we can talk about it, but heading downhill on all fronts, both in Gaza itself and domestically in Israel.
Yeah, and I want to actually hit on both of those pieces before we get on to some of the sound bites we have to look at here. And that is when the ceasefire was broken, and I'm going to circle back to that in a second. But I saw that lots of reports of major protests going on in Israel. I don't know if they're still going on, but they were going on for quite a few nights against the Netanyahu government. They're saying, hey, I don't think they were concerned about breaking the ceasefire so much as they were breaking the possibility to get the rest of the hostages back. Can you tell us a little bit about what's actually going on with those protests?
So there are protests, and they were larger than before, because the sense was that the Israeli government had clearly decided not to go to phase two of the negotiations, because at the end of phase two, that would have meant that the IDF was supposed to leave Gaza, including leaving the Philadelphia corridor, which separates between Gaza and Egypt, and not moving on to phase two meant that the remaining live hostages in Gaza would not be returned, and there was no schedule as to when they would be returned. So that was a cause for a great deal of rage among large parts of the public, that the government had given up on the hostages for clearly political reasons. And there is a sense now in a significant part of the country that what is called the war, which is really not a war at all. There is no war in Gaza. The IDF is operating there, but it's not fighting a war against anyone. That so-called war is being conducted only for political reasons, for internal political reasons, to keep Netanyahu in power, and that it comes at the expense of the lives of the hostages. That's the main reason for the expansion of the demonstrations, but they have not been large enough, as many commentators in Israel say, to make the government change its policies. People speak in Israel about, if 1 million people came out to the streets, block the Knesset, block the roads, if there was some kind of a general disruption of the economy, and all over general strike, then yes, then it would make a difference. But that has not happened despite some threats, and the government feels that it can continue doing what it's doing.
And since this is not just a theoretical or a general interest issue for you, since you just said that some of your own family members were part of those hostages released, I wonder, to the extent that you're willing or able, if you can tell us a little bit about what happened with that and what their experiences were under the hostage situation.
So the member of my family who came back, Oad Ben Ami, is a man in his 50s who spent hundreds of days in captivity, and he was among the group of hostages that came back who were severely emaciated. That did not happen with all hostages returning, but they were severely emaciated. One of the hostages who came back together with him was not, so to speak, as lucky as he was, because Ohad came back to a loving family, to his wife and 3 daughters. The other man who came back, his wife and 2 babies were killed while they were being hostages, and he found out about it only after he came back.
Oh my gosh.
I have to say that one has to admire those people. This man, Oad Ben Ami, who after very few days of recovery went back to demonstrate with the demonstrators to demand the release of the other hostages. But as I said, the government is generally quite indifferent to any of that. It has its own agenda, and it's just not interested in this.
And how were they treated under occupation?
You mean when they were hostages? Well, look,
yeah.
I mean, they came back in really emaciated. So they were not treated well, and there were many reports of people, especially younger men, men who were either soldiers or associated with being soldiers because they were of military age, who were tortured, who were beaten, who were psychologically tortured, and were kept for months in tunnels. Some of them are wounded. The wounds have not healed. They've hardly received any medical attention. They have no air. They're covered with lice. I mean, the conditions there are horrific. Obviously, they're horrific also for the Hamas fighters there. But they were speaking about severe malnutrition, lack of clean water, drinking salt water, very, very difficult conditions, including some people who were chained over a long period of time or kept in cages. So you can imagine that the dehumanization is very severe, and there is great fear that those who are still there are dying as we speak.
And I wonder if you could help us understand, because maybe I just don't understand the dynamics enough. I had believed from the outset that a deal could have been made to get the hostages back as long as the Israeli government was willing to give up quite a lot. But my argument had always been that even if Israel gave up a lot, they would still be in the Gaza Strip. They would still be locked up, so it wouldn't actually cost them too much, but in exchange for getting all their hostages back. Was that an actual possibility? And in the situation now, what could Israel do to get the rest of them back if it wanted to?
So Hamas has been saying for a long time, I think since May 2024 already, so it's been a very long time. It's saying something very simple. It is willing to return all the hostages, including the bodies of over 40 who died there, some because Hamas killed them when the IDF got close, and some because the IDF killed them as it was raining bombs on areas where they were living, including some who were gassed because of explosions nearby, died from poison gas from the bombs. Hamas has been saying, we can give you all the hostages back if you give us all our prisoners back and leave the Gaza Strip entirely. And Israel has been unwilling to do that. And what many of the protesters are saying, certainly the families of the hostages are saying, do that. We can get all the hostages. And the government has not been doing that. And as you know, I mean, the last exchange of hostages really came, and the ceasefire came because of pressure from Donald Trump as he was coming into office. Heavy pressure on Netanyahu. Netanyahu had no interest in doing that, but he caved in. So the government does not want to do it. On the sort of technical issue is that Netanyahu may lose his government. But it's deeper than that, much deeper than that. And we can talk about this. The government now has a plan as to what to do with Gaza. And that plan does not include leaving the Gaza Strip at all. It actually talks about removing the Palestinians from Gaza and destroying whatever is left of it. And so it's unwilling to agree to that. There are people who say in Israel, well, if you leave, we get all the hostages back, then, if Hamas stays there, there will be soon enough reason to go back in there, right? I mean, they will produce those reasons. And theoretically, what spokespeople of the government are saying, well, we will have to give guarantees to the United States and so forth that we won't do that. I don't think that's the real reason. The real reason is that they think they have an opportunity now to solve an issue that they had not been able to solve politically. And what do I mean by to solve the issue? To solve the Palestinian issue, to simply get rid of the Palestinians in Gaza, to make that into a territory controlled entirely by the IDF, from which all or the vast majority or a large part of the Palestinian population would be expelled.
Yeah, we definitely want to get to that in just a second, but kind of as a precursor to that part of the conversation, I want to look at the potential for pressure on Israel from the outside, especially from really the rest of the world. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, made a couple of comments of late which directly relate to what Israel is doing with the Palestinians.
More than an entire month has passed without a drop of aid into Gaza. No food, no fuel, no medicine, no commercial supplies. As aid has dried up, the floodgates of horror have reopened. Gaza is a killing field, and civilians are in an endless death loop. And I call once again for an independent investigation into the killing of humanitarians, including UN personnel. We must stick to our core principles. Member states of the United Nations must adhere to their obligations under international law. There must be justice and accountability when they do not. The world may be running out of words to describe the situation in Gaza, but we will never run away from the truth. The current path is a dead end, totally intolerable in the eyes of international law and history. And the risk of the occupied West Bank transforming into another Gaza makes it even worse. It is time to end the dehumanization, to protect civilians, release the hostages, ensuring life-saving aid, and renew the ceasefire.
Prior to 10/7 of 2023, these kinds of things that are happening on a routine basis would have been absolutely unconscionable. Nobody, it would have been just outrage around the world. But now here's the Secretary General of the United Nations talking about a number of things that are just, I still have a hard time understanding how Israel can stop all of the aid to going in, apparently all of it. And I'm just wondering, I got some questions. First of all, how can the Palestinians survive if all of the aid is blocked off?
Well, the survival right now has to do with the fact that during the ceasefire, there was a great deal of supply coming in. And so this was being stocked up. But now they're running out of it because there's nothing more is coming in. So in that sense, things, again, are getting worse by the day. And as the Secretary General was saying, just recently, there were horrific attacks. There was evidence now uncovered of 15 aid workers who were obviously killed by the IDF and then buried, and then their aid vehicles were buried a couple of days later next to them. And when that mass grave was uncovered, the IDF said, well, these vehicles, ambulances were driving without their lights on, and so we didn't know what it was. And then they found a phone on one of the people who was killed, on which he filmed the whole thing. And you can see that they were driving with the lights on to rescue another vehicle. And as they arrived there, they were being shot at, and they were all killed, all 15 of them. And this is happening just a couple of days ago. The IDF bombed an encampment in which there were reporters, and killed one reporter who was burned alive. It's absolutely horrific just to watch that. And there's no accountability whatsoever. And Guterres can, of course, say what he says, but he has no power without the Security Council doing anything. The General Assembly can't do anything at all. It's only the Security Council. And European countries and the United States are completely unwilling to do anything about this. They are putting no pressure whatsoever on Israel. They never did. And now, I have to say, with the Trump administration, you know, when Mr. Trump floated the idea of removing all the population of Gaza so that they would be able to rebuild the place and make it into a nice resort, in Israel, there was this idea was greeted very happily. And since then, the Israeli government has adopted it as a plan, and keeps saying, well, we are just in the process of implementing what the American president had said. So it is unprecedented in the sense that a state can get away with this kind of policy on a regular basis, and is not paying any price whatsoever for this, at least not now. I think in the long run, it will, but that won't be of much help for the Palestinians who are being subjected to this violence.
Now, let me ask you something, because one of your primary duties there, or titles anyway, at Brown University is Holocaust Studies. And I wonder if you could compare in the past what has happened with Holocaust and the numbing, I guess, if I can use that term, of populations around the world who, at least some of whom, knew what was going on, but chose to take no action, and what you see going on now. Are there any similarities or differences between the two?
You know, my title is Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies, and I teach the Holocaust and I teach modern genocide. In fact, I'm teaching a class of modern genocide this semester. And you see that very often, that in the case of the Holocaust and in the case of other genocides, when violence goes on for a long time, in our modern era, people become inured to it. As you were saying yourself earlier, the focus shifts to other things. We are now facing horrendous economic problems. So Gaza sort of disappears from sight, and those who are engaged in that can keep doing what they're doing without public attention. But I would say that in the case of Gaza, this in many ways was from the very beginning. Mainstream media in the United States and in Europe, with very few exceptions, have reported very little about the horrors that are happening in Gaza, and moreover, have tended to accept what are often lies being handed out by the Israeli government and by the IDF as truth, and to have always expressed great skepticism of any information that comes from Gaza, whereas in fact, the truth is the opposite, that the IDF is often giving inaccurate information, as, for example, the case with these aid workers who were murdered. And the information coming from Gaza is, if anything, somewhat modified the numbers are lower than they probably are in reality, simply because it is so difficult to count all the deaths and mutilations that are going on there on a daily basis.
And is historically what checks that? What will end a Holocaust? What will end the numbing of the populations to where they finally wake up? Because just from my own perspective, I've just been horrified at this from the beginning. And even though it has become normalized, it's still horrific, and I'm just anguished that, I don't have any power to do anything about it. But when it comes to societies, what can change that dynamic?
Look, I mean, genocide ends usually in one of two ways. Either when those perpetrated genocide have accomplished their goal, and then they stop because they've already done what they wanted to do, or because of intervention, because of military intervention. You can think of many such cases. The Holocaust ended because the Red Army reached the areas where the extermination camps were. And the Nazis evacuated them or destroyed them, blew them up. The genocide of the Armenians did not end. There was no one to stop it, and so the vast majority of Armenians were kicked out of what became Turkey, and large numbers of them died. The genocide in Cambodia ended because the North Vietnamese army invaded Cambodia and put an end to it. If you want to apply it to this case, it is very easy to stop Israel from doing what it is doing. You don't need to invade the place. All you need to do is to stop protecting it and providing it with weapons. I said a long time ago, President Biden could have put an end to all this in November or December 2023. He could have said to Netanyahu, okay, you made your point. Now you have to stop this and agree to negotiations, or you're on your own. We won't give you diplomatic cover in the Security Council, and we won't give you rockets and bombs. And the IDF would have had to stop within 2 to 3 weeks. But he didn't say that. And now there is not an administration, at least not now. I don't know what President Trump will do in the future. I don't know that anybody knows. But right now, on the contrary, Trump seems to have given Netanyahu license to do what he's doing. And one has to understand that this is not a situation that is not evolving, because right now we know that the IDF has decided to destroy Rafah altogether. So the IDF is creating a buffer zone, so to speak, between the Gaza Strip and Egypt, destroying an entire city. That's about 20% of the territory of Gaza. It has already created a huge buffer zone around the whole territory, which is about 16% of the territory. And it's now again widening the Netzarim corridor, which is isolating the top third of the Gaza Strip from the rest of the Strip. So what it is doing, it's increasingly diminishing the territory in which Palestinians can live, and they're living there under conditions that will lead to their death, because they have no supplies, no water, and no security from being attacked at any time by the IDF.
Well, that's not exactly encouraging, but I'm just curious. I just got to ask. I mean, obviously, you're a professor of Holocaust studies. You studied your whole life. As an Israeli, you have that history of your own race having been the victim of that. I can only imagine that there must be some portion of the Israeli population today, which I have read some of, and I'm just wondering what your personal thoughts are, both of that, when you see this happening, which I can only imagine you would like to stop if you possibly could, and yet whether it's me or you or some of these other people in Israel, we don't seem to have the power to make one of those two things happen that you described.
Look, I mean, I'm a realist, and I don't right now see an external dynamic that will stop it because of the politics we talked about. Both America and Germany has formed a new government now, and the incoming German chancellor said that he's going to invite Netanyahu to Berlin, despite the fact that there's an arrest warrant by the ICC against Netanyahu. and Germany is a signatory of the Rome Statute that created the ICC. Is there an internal dynamic in Israel? I don't think so. The only thing that is creating some internal pressure, it seems to me, well, there are two things. One thing is that in order to really take over the whole Gaza Strip, Israel needs to call up a lot of reserves again. And many of the reservists don't want to go. There's much information coming in that units being called up, half of the men don't show up. They just refuse to come. And they're not doing it necessarily for political reasons. They're doing it because they served for hundreds of days in reserve. They have families, they have jobs, they have shops, they have businesses, and they are losing it all. And the economy in Israel is doing badly. And so that's a constraint on the army. But as I said, there's not much of a war there anyway, because Hamas does not cannot actually demonstrate any organized military opposition to the IDF.
So what's going on in Rafah? If there's no armed or organized resistance, what is the IDF doing in Rafah?
It's destroying it. It's flattening the whole city right now to create a so-called buffer zone. But you understand, the Gaza Strip is not a large area. And the larger the buffer zones are, the less territory there is for people to live in. Much of the agricultural land is being destroyed. Farms, orchards have all been destroyed. And so people are being pushed into the Mawasi area, which is a sort of coastal area in west of Rafah, along the Mediterranean. There's nothing there. There's no infrastructure there or anything. People are living in tents. The people went back to northern Gaza during the ceasefire, built tents on top of their destroyed houses. So, but the other internal dynamic that is happening in Israel, but it's very hard to tell where that is going, is that Israel now is in a kind of constitutional crisis. The prime minister has fired the head of the Shin Bet. And the Shin Bet, among other things, is in charge of preserving democracy in Israel. And the head of the Shin Bet reported publicly that Netanyahu was putting pressure on him to report to the court that is trying Netanyahu himself for corruption, that it cannot come to the court for security reasons. And he refused to do that. And as a result of that, and because the Shin Bet has now provided information that Netanyahu had known about the possibility of an attack by Hamas long before, he wants to get rid of him. He already got rid of the chief of staff. He already got rid of the Minister of Defense. He wants to get rid of all the people who are associated with October 7th, apart from himself, and to replace them with yes men. And so this now is creating a constitutional crisis. The Attorney General and the Supreme Court have said that this head of the Shin Bet cannot be fired right now, that it's illegal to fire him. And so the government is trying now to oust the Attorney General. And the only barrier to whatever is left of Israeli democracy is the Supreme Court, which is a very cautious and conservative Supreme Court that is trying somehow to preserve its own existence and at the same time to preserve democracy. That is exercising many Israelis who are fearful that their own democracy, never mind Gaza, but that their own democracy is going to be taken away from them. But I wouldn't put my money on Netanyahu losing this battle.
Yeah. And certainly not anytime soon, it doesn't appear.
Yeah.
Real quick, before we move on to the next section here, I wonder if you could say something, because Gutierrez mentioned also some issues with the West Bank, that they're trying to turn the West Bank into a new Gaza. Right. What's the situation there?
The situation there, I think I even mentioned it in one of our previous talks, but of course it's greatly been exacerbated since. So the IDF has begun implementing its Gaza tactics in the West Bank. And it's doing it by bringing in tanks, helicopters, jet planes, drones. And right now, it has entirely flattened the refugee camp of Jenin, which is like a city, right? It's part of the city of Jenin. It has displaced about 40,000 Palestinians in the northern part of the West Bank, and it's moving on to other cities in that region, such as Tulkarem. So it's beginning to implement a policy of gradual decimation and destruction of concentrations of Palestinians in the northern West Bank. There's also a great deal of violence going on in the hills around Hebron, in the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And there have been many, many pogroms there that are hardly ever reported in the American media. These are real pogroms, meaning that settlers attack Arab Palestinian settlements. And when the army is called in, the army usually either participates in that or doesn't do anything, and then arrests some of the Palestinians who had been attacked by the settlers. And the dynamic is to keep pushing smaller Palestinian communities entirely off their land. And that's happened already in scores of communities there that have simply had to abandon their land. And you remember there was just recently, an Israeli-Palestinian movie received the Oscar in Hollywood, and the Palestinian filmmaker went back to his village. Their village was attacked just about 10 days ago by these hoodlums, by these settlers, was beaten up, was put on an ambulance, and then was arrested with fractures by the IDF and kept there for, I think, about 48 hours before he was finally released. So he might have become a celebrity worldwide, but in his own village, he was treated like a dog, both by the settlers and by the IDF. That's a situation there now. And again, there's no control over that. And so obviously it'll get worse. And it became worse when there was a ceasefire in Gaza, because then the IDF moved forces from the south to the West Bank, right? It had more available soldiers during the ceasefire. So what Guterres is talking about is indeed phase 2 of Gaza is the West Bank. There's no question about it. It's not easy. There's 3 million people living there. But that is the dynamic.
That's that's a little worse than I realized. But the whole thing could be exacerbated even more. You mentioned earlier in the show about some of the things Trump has been saying, that Netanyahu was saying we're trying to support the Trump plan. Well, he kind of doubled down on that in the White House. I guess it was yesterday when Netanyahu was here. Here's how he put it.
You know how I feel about the Gaza Strip. I think it's an incredible piece of important real estate. And I think it's something that we would be involved in, but having a peace force like the United States there, controlling and owning the Gaza Strip would be a good thing. Because right now, all it is for years and years, all I hear about is killing and Hamas and problems. And if you take the people, the Palestinians, and move them around to different countries, and you have plenty of countries that will do that, and you really have a freedom zone. You call it the freedom zone, a free zone, a zone where people aren't going to be killed every day. That's a hell of a place.
Yeah, freedom zone. I'm not sure that many Palestinians would agree with that terminology, because the only way it's free is if they're all gone. He also talked about that he wanted a U.S. peace force, and that he would be controlled and owned by the United States. What is your understanding of what that even means?
Look, I mean, the whole thing is somewhat insane. So first of all, the logic that Trump is presenting is that because things are so bad in Gaza and everything is being devastated, then the most humane thing to do would be to move the people out and rebuild the place. It's a good thing for everyone. Now, why was the place destroyed? Because it was bombed by the IDF. whose bombs were doing that? It's American-made bombs. So the US supplied the hardware to destroy Gaza so that then it can say, well, it's unlivable now. We have to do the humane thing and move them to Canada, for instance, so that they will have a good life there and will be safe and will build something nice. Secondly, what he's talking about is the United States, the president of the United States, is condoning, or in fact encouraging, a war crime. Forcible displacement is a war crime. It's a crime against humanity. You can't just move people because you think it would be better for them to be in another place. So the United States, that was the main engine behind the establishment of the entire international legal order after 1945, is now saying, well, but not in this case. It'll be much nicer if we just move them away. Clearly force them to move away.
Yeah, and he's said several times that we'll give them the opportunity. But I want to focus on that narrow point for a second. I have heard many times over the years that the Palestinian peoples who have been living in anguish and languishing in the Gaza Strip since 1947 don't want to leave because they view it as their historic home, etc. So, but if they were given a chance, especially after this horrific period of time since October 2023, do you think they go somewhere, or some number of them?
Yes, I'm sure they would. I mean, it's unlivable. That was the policy, to make it unlivable. And the argument was made: how can you rebuild this place when people are living there? Of course, no one made that argument, say, in Berlin in 1945. Some people spoke. Churchill, for a while, said about maybe we'll just make it into an agricultural land. But eventually, it was clear that if you want to rebuild a place, you need the people to rebuild it, to rebuild their own place. And so it would be much better for Palestinians to be able to stay there and rebuild it and build it as a very different place under a very different political paradigm. But that political paradigm is not being offered by anyone. What is being offered is simply a removal of the population. Obviously, the United States will not put troops there. It'll be Israeli troops that will be there. That is the plan of the Israeli government, to make that into an occupation zone with as few Palestinians as possible. And what they want to build there is not a resort as Trump imagines it, but to build settlements there. There were settlements there before. It's a very good agricultural land, and that's what they would like to do, and to expand the country. So Trump, in a sense, is both continuing Israeli policy. It's in the same, this was the logic of the operation in Gaza, to make it uninhabitable, providing, I'd say, the kind of common sense solution to things. Let's move them off. Let's rebuild the place and make it into a nice, happy, peaceful place without the people who had originally lived there. And I don't know what can stop it, apart from the Palestinian notion of sumud, of holding on to the land, of attaching themselves to the land and not moving. But you're right. At this point, if the borders were to open, I think that many people would leave, because they have been reduced to it's absolutely horrific what is going on there, and we're getting so few reports from the reality on the ground. Yeah.
And what is your expectation? Let's say, and I'm just picking numbers out of thin air. Let's say 100,000 people said, yes, we want to leave. We're going to go to Canada. Canada said, sure, we'll take 100,000 people. Where would they go in Canada? I mean, culturally, they're as different as night is from day. And would Canada just give them cities to have? Would they spread them out and let them exist in other countries or other cities? And then you have, some obvious issues with that right there. I mean, functionally, how would this even work?
Well, functionally, what was being spoken about, of course, was not Canada, but was rather Egypt or Jordan or African countries. African countries have no interest in that. Jordan would not agree to that because it would be the end of the Hashemite monarchy, and Egypt would not agree to that. So there is no place. Some people said, why not move them into the Sinai Peninsula, put them in some nice desert location. So it's not. But another thing that I would say, I mean, if you make an analogy with another case, with the case of Rwanda. So in Rwanda, there was a genocide in 1994. You remember the Tutsi, 800,000 Tutsi were murdered by the Hutu majority population there. And then there was an invasion at the same time. There was an invasion of Tutsi who were living in Uganda, just north of the border. And that invasion stopped the genocide. But most of the Tutsi who had been living in Rwanda by then were dead. And they were replaced by the Tutsi who came from across the border. So if you think about it in the terms of Israel, Israel already expelled the vast majority of Palestinians who had been living in what became the state of Israel in 1948. Those Palestinians are those who live in Jordan, in the West Bank, and in the Gaza Strip. They are the refugees and, of course, the descendants of the refugees who were kicked out in 1948, 750,000 of them. So the idea that you would move them again does not mean that anything would be over. They would want to still come back.
Yeah.
You need to find a political solution to this,
right,
not through bombs. That's the only thing that will finally resolve this conflict.
Right. And that's one of the things that I've been harping on from the beginning. If you don't have an outcome to where both the Israelis and the Palestinians both have a future and a hope and a possibility, nobody's going to have peace on either side of that line. And I think you've just driven that home. Real quick, I want to jump to a couple of other things here because I'm running short on time. Gary, let's run to Netanyahu because he makes an interesting claim here in that same press conference or that same press gaggle in the Oval Office that he doesn't know who's been holding the Gaza people in there.
I think what the president talked about is, first of all, to give people a choice. Gazans were closed in. And every other place, including in arenas of battle, I mean, whether it's Ukraine or Syria or any other place, people could leave. Gaza was the only place where they locked them in. We didn't lock them in. They're locked in. And what is wrong with giving people a choice? Now, we've been talking, including over lunch, about some countries, I won't go into them right now, that are saying, if Gazans want to leave, we want to take them in. And I think this is the right thing to do.
Okay, first of all, what does he mean we didn't lock them in? Because everybody used to call the Gaza Strip the world's biggest open-air prison forever. Somebody was keeping them in there.
Yeah, for 16 years, there was a siege, an Israeli siege over Gaza, and it was a siege by land, air, and water. And there was only one narrow corridor also to Egypt. All the rest was controlled by Israel. You couldn't just leave the Gaza Strip without Israel allowing you to do it. You couldn't fish without Israel allowing you to do it. So no, I mean, it's obviously nonsense. And Israel has actually had, I think this government has had great trouble finding anybody who would like to take in Palestinian refugees, both because countries don't like taking in large numbers of foreigners, but also because of the political aspect of this, of course, because this would be collaborating with Israeli ethnic cleansing under a different name. Right. So this notion, and this is floated in Israel all the time, it's called, we need to encourage them to leave. And we know that encouraging people to leave means that you shoot over their heads, and if it doesn't persuade them, then you start shooting them outright.
Now, let me ask a hard question. So Netanyahu's saying, and Trump is echoing, let's give them a choice. Let them go somewhere else, assuming that they find somewhere else. And let's just for the moment suggest that those political leaders do find some country willing to let some number of them in. Whatever number leaves, it's going to be comparatively small, and there's still going to be a massive number of people. I mean, and again, just picking a number here, let's say that it's only 1.5 million people say we're not leaving, we're going to stay here. What does Israel do then? Because if they keep the siege on, if they keep not allowing food in there, people will literally start starving to death. Is it conceivable that Israel could literally, by whatever means, kill that many people?
Look, I mean, in truth, I don't know. And I don't really think that many Israeli policymakers are even thinking about it. Netanyahu, for sure, is playing his game day by day. And for now, he feels that he can somehow continue the war because he needs the war to continue. He can make life increasingly miserable for Palestinians, and he can hope that something will happen. What that something is, well, it's next week, it's not this week. And as long as he can maintain this balance, and he has done it, one has to say, who believed that Netanyahu would stay in power so long after October 7th, which was entirely his own fiasco? And he, in some ways, has become stronger than he was in the immediate aftermath of the Hamas attack. So I don't know. There are people to his right, the Ben Gvirs and Smotriches around him, who, yes, they would not mind many more dying. But could anyone have imagined before October 7th that Israel could kill over 50,000 people, 70% of them civilians, with total impunity? So in that sense, one extreme measure legitimizes an even more extreme measure. And it is possible, because probably the numbers are much higher than that the numbers will keep growing, that people will try to leave. They're banking probably on a humanitarian disaster. There's a lot of pressure in Israel from the right not to supply Palestinians with anything. And that there will be a combination of decimation of the population, flight of the population, and then Israeli control over whatever is left there. I think it will be a complete disaster. It'll be disaster. It already is. The kind of stain that will remain now for generations to come on Israel and what he did, and on future generations of Israelis who will have to bear the responsibility for what was done in their name by their parents, by their children, won't go away. But the inability of Israeli policymakers, of Europeans and of Americans to understand that one must change this paradigm, and that every day that passes makes this more and more horrific, is really hard to fathom, I must say.
It really is. And in my estimation, we're not talking about even 1.5 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip, because now the situation has escalated even in the West Bank. You're talking about somewhere around 5 million people that you either have to get all of them out, or you're going to have to change your policy, because you can't keep going with where they're going, and those people stay there because they're incongruous. They cannot continue on that way. And so it seems to me that they're setting themselves up, that the Netanyahu government, that the Trump administration, that the European Union writ large, they're all setting up a situation that cannot be solved without an unimaginable human catastrophe that I don't know that anybody would success for. But if they won't do that, then there's not a plan B that will solve this. I mean, it just seems like it's going to only get worse for everyone.
Well, I mean, I think their plan B, and what may happen, is that Israel will become a full-blown apartheid state. It's already constructed an apartheid regime in the West Bank, which is becoming increasingly violent, and it may potentially succeed in doing that in Gaza, finding some kind of local authority that will manage things under the thumb of the IDF. So people will be living, as many are living in the West Bank, in enclaves that are separated from each other by, bypass roads and checkpoints and fences and military camps, and to try and continue that. I don't think that that's viable in the long run. I think that it will mean that in the long run, Israel will become a pariah state. Its allies will no longer, its Western allies will no longer be able to speak about it, as they still do, ironically, as the only democracy in the Middle East, of the IDF as being the most moral army in the world. I mean, it won't be possible to say any of that. It will become a de jure apartheid state. And even Jewish communities around the world will increasingly want to distance themselves from that state, which will be also a main trigger for growing anti-Semitism around the world. And so I don't think it's viable in the long run, but that no long run can be a decade or two.
Yeah.
And there is another way, and there's no vision anywhere. There's simply in right now. I mean, people who speak about this like me are seen as, anti-Israeli, anti-Zionist, anti-Semitic, whatever. Instead of saying we need to come up with a different vision, we need to find a way for these two groups to share that space. There is no other solution, and not share it in an apartheid situation, but share it with equality and dignity for everyone. It's possible. And I think the majority of people on the ground actually would want to have it, but they have no leadership, no political leadership, no intellectual leadership. And the West, in the name of protecting Israel, has betrayed it.
Right.
It's betraying everything that Israel was supposed to stand for as the answer to what happened to the Jews in World War II. And it's allowing it to destroy itself by just standing by and saying, well, we can't do anything about that because of our own guilt about what happened in the Holocaust.
Yeah, that is so perverse that what the fallout from some horrific thing that happened to the Jews in World War II is now preventing this resolution of something which will inadvertently harm them in the present and into the future, I think. And it's just a perverse situation that, again, is going to end up seeing not only the Palestinians who are paying the brunt right now, but even Jews in the future. And that just anguishes me.
Yes, look, I mean, this is, I just published this essay in the New York Review of Books where I say exactly that. I say, the most tragic thing is that the Holocaust is being used as a license for genocide. To think about it in those terms, to think that at the end of World War II, an entire regime of international law was created with the hope that it would prevent anything like that from happening again. This was the never again notion. Now, of course, there were many genocides after World War II, but this at least was the idea of creating a framework to somehow be able to adjudicate, prevent, and punish cases of inhumanity on this scale. And that now Israel has not only used this argument that the Hamas were the new Nazis and that what happened on October 7th was just like the Holocaust, and therefore it gives Israel a license to get away with murder, but also in the process of doing that, it is dismantling the very international legal edifice that was created after 1945. And so this is not only an issue of what will happen between Israel and the Palestinians, it's destroying the international order, the international legal humanitarian order. And there's no reason why other rogue states will not say now, well, if the Israelis could get away with it, why should we pay any attention to any of that? And the countries that established that, Germany, Britain, France, the US, are standing by and doing nothing.
Yeah, that's the cold, hard, ugly truth. And whether anybody in the West wants to hear it, I don't care. It's the truth, and it's demonstrable, and it's incontrovertible. And we're going to be paying for this one for a long time, I fear. But I am so grateful for you coming on today and to give an honest, courageous truth to this, because I know you're facing a lot of headwinds, and we're really grateful for you coming on and telling the truth no matter what. And we're really honored to have you on today. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
And we thank you guys for watching us too. Be sure and share this with folks because this stuff just doesn't get covered at all in the mainstream media at all, and it needs to, because this is something that's going to reverberate back on us in a way that we won't like in the future, and history will remember kindly those who do something about it now. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.